So thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's program. I'm very much looking forward to Author Hour in Massachusetts with best-selling author Penn Cole. So, best-selling author Penn Cole will discuss her popular fantasy series, The Kindred's Cursed Saga, in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. And a little bit about Penn. Penn is an internationally best-selling author of magical worlds, feisty women, and angsty romance. I learned some new terms while starting to listen to your book, Pen, including shadow daddy. I'm learning all these
Yeah, very important.
terms. Yes, I'm getting. I mean, so her
Critical.
date. Yes, exactly. Her debut series, The Kindred's Curse Saga, has been sold in 16 languages to date. And before pursuing her lifelong dream of publishing, Penn had a prior career as an artist and an attorney. Although she's a Texas girl born and bred, she currently lives with her husband in France, where she can usually be found eating far too many pastries and trolling her readers on Discord. So, for those of us watching live and the many more watching the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Penn for joining us today. And Penn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So, Penn, before we start discussing your series, I want to discuss you because you have a fascinating personal story. Could you tell us your origin story of how you became a writer?
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer. I mean, my earliest memories were I was raised by essentially a single mom, and she would take me to the library and drop me off while she worked or ran errands or did what she needed to do. And, the library largely raised me. And I would just spend all day absorbed in books. And then I would go home and I would want to create stories of my own and imagine worlds and, write little characters in my notebook of what they might be doing. And that stuck with me my entire life. It was my undergraduate degree. I always knew it was something I wanted to do long term. As I think happens to many people who want to pursue art when they're young, voices got into my head telling me, "Oh, that's not a real career. You can't do that. You need to do something steady and stable and, or a real job." And so I put it on the back burner for many, many, many years, and I pursued other jobs. I became an attorney, but I never lost that love of writing and that dream of writing my own book and publishing it. And so I had a lot of kind of false starts where I thought, okay, this year I'm going to do it. And it just never happened. And then the pandemic happened. And as I think happened with many of us, I had a bit of a life reset and said, is this really where I want to be? Is this what I really want to do? And my husband had the same. We kind of looked at each other and realized we weren't super happy working, 80-hour weeks in our respective jobs. And so we number one moved to France, which I don't necessarily recommend doing during a global pandemic, but it worked out. And in the process, I had to leave my job as an attorney and couldn't find a job here in France as an attorney for a multitude of reasons. And so my husband said, as long as I've known you, you have wanted to be an author. Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time. And so, thankfully, with his support, I was able to take some time off of work and just focus on writing my book. And that's when I actually wrote Spark, Glow, and Heat all in the span of about 1 year, the first three books in the series. And I thought, I gave myself 1 year. I said, okay, I'll write these, I'll self publish them, see if anything happens. And some things happened.
And boy, that's an understatement. Some things
Yeah.
certainly did happen. I believe you sold nearly a half a million copies within the first 13 months of publication. And
Something crazy like that. We just hit 1.4 million copies sold
I'm using dated
recently.
information from July 2024, so sorry about that.
No problem. No,
Uh,
no. I think of Spark, it's been about that many. If
yeah,
the 1.4 is across the entire, all three books.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. And so, Yeah, so you were an indie author. You are still an indie author. You're what's called a hybrid author, I guess. But
Right.
what is that amazing thing that happened? How did you become? How did you get picked up by a big major publishing company?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to self-publish, that I never really considered traditional publishing for a whole lot of reasons. I am very business-minded, having been an attorney in the past, having run my own businesses in the past. I wasn't afraid of the business side of publishing. And many authors, in order to work with publishers, have to fork over like a massive percentage of their royalties. I think the average royalties in traditional publishing are like 10%. And I thought, if I'm going to be doing all this work to market and promote the books, to, um, just do everything that it takes, I want to keep the lion's share of those royalties myself. And I felt really strongly about that. So I dove into self-publishing. I learned everything I possibly could. I mean, I joined all the forums, read all the books, studied the people who were doing the best in self-publishing, and I threw everything I had at it. And I think a lot of people love to believe it's like an overnight thing, or you have one viral video and all of a sudden like you're made. And it wasn't like that at all. It was very much a grind for just months and months and months and months, every day, promoting the series, watching it slowly grow and grow and grow. And so it was very steadily growing for about 8 months, but a little longer than that. And I get an email from Atria, which is imprint of Simon and Schuster, one of the largest publishers in the world. And they say, we're interested in publishing your book. And to be honest, didn't think it was going to work out because I felt pretty strongly about holding on to my digital rights because I had done the work to make the book big. And I thought I should keep, the upside of that. But I'm incredibly lucky that Atria is such a forward-thinking publisher. They have worked with a lot of authors that were self-published before. They've picked up a lot of indie books. And so they are thinking about things in a way that a lot of publishers aren't, and finding creative ways to structure publishing deals to make sure that it's a benefit both to the publisher and to the author as well. And so we were able to work out a really non-traditional publishing arrangement where I could keep, my digital rights. They took the print rights, and we really worked together as partners to make this book as big as it can be. So it's a very unusual, non-traditional path in publishing, but for me, it's like the best of both worlds.
I've interviewed a lot of authors who really enjoy the writing portion, but really hate the promotion piece.
Yeah.
ZZ asks, I'd love to hear how you marketed the Indie Spark, how the momentum started and grew, and what you did. So you touched on this a little bit just now, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. So how did you market the Indie? Talk about the momentum and how it grew
Yeah.
into what it did.
So two things. I'll answer the question you asked, and then I'll answer the question you didn't ask, which I think is the more important one. So the question you asked, how I marketed it was a variety of things. I did a really big ARC program, which is advanced reader copies, where I basically gave a copy of the book to anyone who would give me the time of day and said, please read my book. I think I gave out like 350 copies, which for indies is a pretty large number. And I was on social media literally every day for just months and months and months, posting every single day, answering every comment, DMing people. It really was hours a day that I was spending, not just promoting my book, but also just being present in the book community online. These communities like Book Talk, Bookstagram, the Facebook book communities are really active. They're just amazing. They're really amazing communities. And I tried to not just come in as a salesman where everything I had to say was read my book. This is my book. Would you please try my book? It was more about, hey, I also love books. And what kind of books do you like? I also love those kinds of books. Like that's also my favorite character. And just getting to know people, relating to people one on one. and forming those relationships so that they see, okay, I trust her advice in books and her taste because it's my taste too. Like we like the same books. Maybe that means I'll like the book that she wrote. And so for many people, it really started as that kind of relationship first, and then they gave my book a try. And of course, then they told other people and they told other people, and it became this really grassroots movement. Um, I never did ads. Not that I have anything against them, I just never did them. I didn't really do a big PR box campaign like a lot of authors do. I really put my focus on socials and building a reader community on socials as well as in my Discord. And that was a big part of it. Okay, so the question you didn't ask that I think is more important because I get this a lot, like how do I market my book? And I think if you're asking that question after the book is written, you're a little late to the game. I think that question comes much earlier on, before you ever write it. I think you need to be thinking about like, how am I going to market this book? And writing to market. Make sure that the thing that you're writing is the thing that readers want and that you're packaging it and building it in a way that is going to encourage people when they turn the last page to say, I have to tell somebody about this. I need to talk. I need my friends to read this so we can talk about this. Um, like, I got to get everybody I know to read it. And in order to do that, number one, you have to be writing to market, which is paying attention to the trends, paying attention to the things that readers love about popular books that they want to see in more books. Not necessarily on a surface level. Some people often think it's like, oh, well, there's a vampire book. That means I also need to write a vampire book. And I don't think that's it. I think it's more like, people love a book with like a really nuanced found family where the characters come from diverse backgrounds and they all have their own traumas and their own arcs that they go on. Like people love like that. And you can take that and you can do it yourself in a really unique, refreshing way that hasn't been done before, even though it's a very familiar, trope within the genre. So it's writing to market, but it's also writing in a way that like encourages people to theorize about what's going to happen in the next book or what did that mean, like putting in little riddles and prophecies that people can speculate about. For me, a lot of it was social commentary. I talk about a lot of issues that are really prevalent in the world right now because I want my book to make people think deeper beyond the pages of the story. So, if you're not thinking about that stuff and writing a book that really encourages people to talk and getting that word of mouth going, you're already kind of behind the game. It starts from day one and it has to be a thought in everything that you do for your entire process as an author.
And Penn, we were talking before we went live about the importance of cover art and
Yeah.
the just the physical book as an object. Can you talk briefly about the importance of that when it comes to romanticy? By the way, can we also just take a step back? Well, why don't you answer that question, and then I'm going to ask you a question about romanticy.
Yeah, I personally think the cover is the second most important choice that an author makes after the book itself, Like writing is of course always number one, but I think cover is number two because, when you think about walking through a library or a bookstore, you're looking at cover art and that generally determines what you pick up and turn around and look at the back of and like read the little synopsis. So if the cover art isn't doing its job of getting you to pick up the book, you've lost most people there. That is such a huge barrier in getting people to even find out what your book is about. And so I really encourage authors to do a lot of market research and a lot of study in what's going on with the top books in their genre, what are trends, what are kind of things that are falling out of favor before they decide on their cover, and also to make sure they're hiring a cover artist who is familiar with this stuff and who knows what is normal and what isn't normal in a genre, but also not being afraid to step out of the box a little bit. My covers are very non-traditional for my genre. It's if you walk through a romantasy section, it's pretty much a wall of black with like lots of skulls and crowns and flowers and a lot of this sort of the same imagery on many, many books. And not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but I wanted my book to be the one that your eye goes straight to, on a wall of covers. And so I went with something that was white instead of black. And I went with like bold, bright oranges and yellows and reds instead of kind of the dark colors that we typically see in the genre. And I think that was a huge part of what helped me rise above sort of the thousands of self-published books that came out at the same time. Was mine was you could kind of spot it in a crowd and it kind of stuck with you because it was so unusual. So it's a little bit of contradictory advice because you have to fit into your genre for sure so that people look at your book and immediately know that's fantasy, that's romantasy, that's a thriller or whatever. But then it has to be memorable enough that it sticks in their head and makes them want to pick that book up and look at more.
Can you talk a bit about the rise of the popularity of romantasy? I feel like romantasy has been around for a while, but I feel
Yeah.
like, and I'm a non, don't hate me, but I'm not really a romantasy reader, but I do pay attention to publishing trends, book trends, and certainly, Rebecca Yarros and
Yeah.
Sarah J. Maas and Penn Cole, all these wonderful authors with these fantastic romantasy series. So, what is going on? Why is there such a yearning from readers for books like this?
I could talk about this for hours, just this topic. It has been around for a very long time. I think it's a misconception that it's new. The term romantasy is new for sure. That has come about in the last few years. But romantasy as a genre, I mean, I started reading it 25 years ago with Kushiel's Dart, in like the 90s. Or I guess it was 90s now. And so it has been around for so long. There are authors that have been doing it for decades, like Anne Bishop and Nalini Singh, Mercedes Lackey, so many people. But I think that a lot of it sort of started as this is a hot take. People may disagree with me on this, but I think that romantasy started a little bit as fantasy for women in the sense that fantasy as a whole was very male dominated for so long. And it was mostly male authors, it was male characters, it was written for a male audience, male editors. It wasn't that women didn't exist, but they were very much a small segment. And women in books were often either the love interest or like some catty, exaggerated villain. And very rarely did you see a woman saving the world and leading the band of elves, to get the ring or whatever. Uh, and then you have this group of women, especially in the late 90s and the early 2000s, that wrote books that really put women at the forefront. And they were the ones saving the world with other women, friendships that were healthy and supportive and not, catty. And they were written by women, they were written for female audiences. And they talked about issues that were really important to women, like sexual autonomy and gender discrimination and consent, and, oppression, these things that women have faced for so long. And it unsurprisingly boomed. It was really, really successful because I think there were so many women that loved fantasy as a genre who wouldn't, but they didn't see a place for themselves in it. And that really said, hey, actually, we like fantasy too. Please pay attention to us. And has slowly grown and grown and grown and grown. And it really blew up during the pandemic, in part, I think, because of TikTok was a huge aspect of helping A Court of Thorns and Roses have this huge resurgence that kind of kicked off this new romantasy golden age. And also, I think, again, because of the pandemic, people wanted escapism. They were trapped at home and they wanted to be out having the adventures that they couldn't have because they were locked inside. And so I really think that played a big part in fantasy having a moment that is still lasting today.
So we kind of glossed over something, but when you were describing how your series came about, you had mentioned that you wrote the first three books in a very short amount of time. I think you might have even said like a year. I
Yeah.
realized that was during the COVID pandemic, but
Yeah.
that still is like amazing. Can
Yeah.
you walk us through at a 5,000 foot level? Can you walk us through your writing process? And it certainly sounds like you are a planner, but so you plan things out quite a bit? A plotter, I guess, would
Yeah.
be the correct word. Do you plan things out far in advance as you're writing, or are you more of a pantser and you're sort of letting the story kind of tell itself?
I'm about as far to the plotter end of the spectrum as you
Yeah.
can get. I really love to plan. I mean, before I started, I had my books outlined to the chapter, kind of knowing exactly what would happen. Now, of course, okay, we plan, our characters laugh. Things go off the rails when you start writing, and you have to be okay with that. You have to let your characters go where they want to go and be ready to adapt. That's just creating art. But I, as a reader, love reading books where there's a lot of foreshadowing and a lot of Easter eggs. And when you go back and reread for a second time, you say, oh my gosh, in chapter one, they told us how this was going to end. Like we had all the clues the whole time. I love those moments. And that was kind of the moments that I wanted to write myself. So I knew in order for me to do that, I had to know we were going so that I could lay down the foreshadowing in those early books. So I heavily plotted out everything, and then of course had to reassess at various points throughout as things start to change and shift. But having the guardrails of this is the general story that I want to tell gave me a lot of freedom and confidence to have more flexibility in that middle with how we got there and who the characters became along the way.
Now we'll just get it out of the way now, because I'm sure if I don't ask it now, we're going to get it five more times during the Q&A. We did have, let me see who it was here. Amanda wants to know, when can we expect the release date for book number 4, Penn? This is probably a question you get, forget about every day. You probably get it every hour, maybe every
Pretty
minute.
much.
So you want
Pretty
to address
much.
that briefly?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have nothing to say. I don't know. We have a date internally that we're working towards. It is this year. I know that if you Google it, it says like late 2026 or something. That's not accurate. We are trying to get it out this year for sure. Hopefully, not too late in the year. But because there's still, I've had to delay the release several times. And so I finally just canceled the release because I didn't want to disappoint anyone any further. And so I have very adamantly said we are not announcing a release date until I am like 100% certain that we'll be ready and we can hit it. And so I'm not giving any hints. I'm not giving a projected release date until like we are really, really certain that we're going to be able to hit that date. So once that happens, once we know that, we will tell the world, make sure everyone knows. But until all the parts are in place, we are not saying anything. But hopefully later this year.
So, Penn, I promise that's the one and only time I'm going to ask you for book number 4, but I thought we'd get that out of the way there. All right. So, Penn, taking a step back, hey, how about, and I suspect that most of the people on the call are big fans of yours and are familiar with your work. But for those who aren't, maybe those who watch the recording, can you tell us a little bit about the premise of your series?
Yeah. So the Kindred's Curse saga starts with a book called Spark of the Everflame, and in Spark, we follow the story of Diem Bellator, who is a healer that lives in this small mortal village. At the beginning of the book, her mother vanishes unexpectedly, and in the search for answers as to what happened to her mother, Diem is pulled into the middle of this war between the mortals that she grew up with, who are very oppressed. They live in this very unjust two caste system where they have very little rights. Their home has been taken over by the ruling class, who are the descended. They're called the descended because they descend from the gods. So they are demigods with magic and, near immortality. And of course, they're all very attractive, as all demigods should be. And they rule over her world kind of with an iron fist. And so this conflict has been brewing over many generations since they originally colonized the world. And it's starting to come to a head, and Diem finds herself in the center of it between these sides. And she has to, number one, find her mother, but also decide which side of this war she's going to be on, or if she's going to create her own side and how she is going to save her people and save her world.
Wonderful. And so I know that book, and you're going to have to like correct my terminology, but
That's fine.
book number three was sort of like re-released this week,
Yeah.
I believe. So
Yes.
they were initially ebook, and then they were in print, and now you've re-released them or reissued them. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I self-published them as I mentioned, and I when I self-published them, it was in mid 2023. I did it all myself, put the paperback, hardcover, ebook, all of that. And when Simon and Schuster came in and we formed this partnership, we pulled the print books off the market. They made them into these really cool, beautiful deluxe editions. You can see them over here. And they have a new bonus chapter in them. They have new art, new covers, a new map that's really beautiful. The book itself is the same, there's been no change, but it's packaged in this very beautiful format with some fun extras. And so we are in the process of slowly re releasing those onto the market. Spark and Glow released at the end of last year. Heat just released on Tuesday. So we're all caught up now. Everything's on the market. And now we're all just waiting on book four.
Very exciting, very exciting. We know that you've sold lots and lots of copies, but what has? By the way, several library journals star reviewed, lot of critical acclaim for the books. In addition to the book sales, but can you talk in general about how the book's been received, and are you pleased with what you're seeing and hearing with these re-releases?
Yeah, I'm super. It was very unexpected. As number one, an indie author, number two, a debut author, I never really expected anyone to read my books. I think the average self-published author sells like 100 copies in its lifetime or something. So I just kind of hoped. I remember seeing somebody say once that they were selling on average about 10 copies a day, and I thought that was like success. Like, oh my gosh, I would love to hit that point of just selling, 10 copies a day. That was peak for me. And I worked just so hard for every single individual sale, just hoping to kind of hit those kinds of numbers. And it slowly grew and grew and grew and got to that number. And I was really happy. And then it like blew that number way out of the water. And now it's closer to like thousands of copies a day, which is incredible. I'm obviously it's wonderful having people read your book and enjoy it, but I think it's particularly special to me because, as I mentioned before, this book does deal with a lot of like very prescient world themes and issues that we're dealing with right now: discrimination, injustice, oppression, inequality, colonization, um, income inequality, all of these very serious world issues. And even though it is a fun book and I want you to laugh and it's a beautiful romance that I hope you kind of swoon and fall in love with, I also I hope that it's a book that makes you think and makes you maybe look at the world a little bit deeper and with a bit more understanding and compassion for people who maybe don't look like you or come from a different background. And so to see a book that puts that front and center and doesn't shy away from those controversies, to see it be so supported and enjoyed by people gives me a lot of hope for the future of our world and just for humanity generally, that these are things people care about and want to think about and talk about.
I feel like we're living in a dystopia right now, and I think yes, I think that these fantasy worlds are a great place to be thinking about. And I think your one of your core messages of compassion, obviously, is very very timely. So let me ask you this fun question: do you ever see your series? On the small screen or the big screen, or maybe as graphic novels? Do you see them in different mediums? And if you do, in a perfect world, who would you have play Diem?
I definitely do. I would love to see that. I, as a writer, see it visually in my head as it's happening. So I often feel like I'm watching a movie play out in front of me and I'm kind of just typing what's happening. Very, very visual, creatively. So I wrote it in a way that I think encourages adaptation because
Totally.
that's very much what I saw is, like a TV show happening in front of me. So I think that would be, amazing, and I would love that. I've always said that I see Zendaya as my DM, my main character, because number one, I think she kind of looks the part. Number two, DM is, I think, a very funny person. She makes me laugh at least. And she has a lot of dry wit and she cracks a lot of jokes, but also that emotional depth. And she goes through a lot of trauma and a lot of really dark emotional situations. And I just think she's a great actress that can do both the funny stuff, but also like the really serious, poignant stuff.
Sure. All right, so folks, I'm going to slowly start to transition to audience questions. So we'll take about roughly 20 minutes of audience questions. I have plenty of questions on my own if need be, but I'd really love to hear from you as well. So Kirsha, and hopefully I apologize for any mispronunciations. Hopefully I'm getting these right. Kirsha would like to know what made you choose to write a slow burn?
It is definitely a slow burn. For those unfamiliar with the series, you're gonna work for that romance. You are gonna have to put in the time. It's not a book where they're gonna fall in love, on page 50. Uh, I number one, I think it's important to write something that's realistic. I always roll my eyes a little bit when I'm reading a book and they know each other for like a week and suddenly they're falling in love. Like, I'll burn the world down for you. So I really wanted to see my characters struggle and need more time to get to know each other, to really trust each other, to go through some bumps before they fully committed to each other. So it's number one, because it's realistic. But also for me, the best part of a romance is right before they give in, where it's like that classic Pride and Prejudice moment where he's like the hand flex by his side, and you could just tell like he wants her, but he won't let himself like really go for her yet. I love that. I love the yearning and the angst and the I want to be with them, but I can't, So I tried to stretch that out as long as I possibly could without my readers DNFing and giving up. Um, so hopefully I did accomplish that. But yeah, I wanted to make it last as long as we could in that kind of butterflies in your tummy, will they, won't they stage.
Casey asks, is there a particular character whose journey was especially difficult for you to write? Why was
Yeah.
it hard, and how did you navigate that?
Yes, absolutely. There's one character in particular, and I think if there's anyone in the chat that's familiar with me, they already know who I'm going to say, but it's Henry. And if you haven't read the book, Henry is the childhood best friend of our main character. They have grown up together. Their lives have been very parallel. They had kind of similar backgrounds, and they're both come from sort of poor families in a poor village. They both have this resentment and bitterness toward the descended who rule over their realm. They both dream of toppling the descended and freeing their people and claiming it back for the mortals. And they just have very similar personalities. They like to kind of push the limit and be a little bit rebellious. And so I think they always saw themselves growing up side by side, whether that was as romantic, kind of a romantic coupling as we see them try out in the books, or whether that's as friends, they really believed their lives were aligned. And as we meet them at the beginning of Spark, some things are starting to happen in both of their lives that is causing them to veer down different pathways. I think that's a very relatable situation for many people who have ever had like a childhood sweetheart that at one time they were the perfect person for you and everything just clicked super well. And all of a sudden, for reasons you can't really figure out, it just wasn't right anymore and things were starting to be off. And even though you love that person so, so much, um, something just wasn't working anymore, or a friendship that you have had your whole life, and then suddenly you kind of blink and you're like, we can't relate to each other anymore. We want different things. Our lives are very different. And you still love the person, but it's just not the friendship that it used to be. So I think that struggle between them is very relatable. But also with Henry, he's very much the voice of the mortals in this story. He's the voice of the marginalized, oppressed group who is fighting for their liberation against a much more powerful majority. And he lost his mother to a really unjust situation when he was young. He never quite got over it. And he witnesses a really horrific injustice in book one that really radicalizes him and makes him say, we have been trying to do this peacefully and we've been trying to just survive under these unjust laws for so long, and we're done. We are ready to make them listen and to make this change, no matter like whatever it takes. And I have a lot of sympathy for that position for people who have been pushed to their absolute limit through injustice. And they snap and they say, we're going to do whatever it takes to make people see like our plight and what we're going through. Um, and it was really difficult for me because I wanted to get that right. I wanted to do justice to that position, those people who are dealing with that. I wanted to make people take a minute and think about that and have some sympathy for them and what they're going through. I wanted them to see the parallels between what's happening in the book and what's happening out in the real world. And that was like the one part of the book I really lost sleep over. I think every single scene he's in, I wrote and rewrote so many times because I just wanted to make sure that he was conveying the message, or that I was conveying the message through him the way I wanted to. He's not been super well received for a lot of reasons. His role in the romance is, controversial. But I do think often readers' opinion of him is a bit of a mirror that reflects how the public often views those kinds of groups, marginalized groups who have like been pushed to their limit and who are fighting back, sometimes violently. And there's not a lot of sympathy. There's not a lot of forgiveness for them. And I often see that towards Henry as well. So it's a tricky situation. I don't think he's ever going to be super beloved, but he is one of my favorite characters, and he's the one that I think I'm rooting for the hardest.
Well, great follow-up question from Casey. So, speaking of Henry and the message and kind of purpose that he conveys, your Casey writes, your books explore themes of oppression and resilience. How do you balance portraying the harsh realities of injustice while still offering hope to readers?
One thing that I try and do is there's really not a lot of truly evil people in my books. There's a couple, but they're pretty minor characters. For the most part, everybody, even the people you might see as the villains, are very nuanced. And they have very justifiable reasons for the things that they do. And in their minds, they very much think they are the heroes that are doing the right thing to save the people who are the true victims in the situation. And none of them, well, very few of them are intentionally trying to hurt anyone. They're just trying to protect their people or their family at whatever cost. And so I hope that in some way it helps me to think that people aren't evil. It can be really easy to think, especially with a lot of what's going on in the world, to just think that a certain person or a certain group of people are just purely evil. Um, and it helps me to think that they're not, and that they can be good, and that they're capable of changing and being better people and caring about others who don't look like them or come from their backgrounds if you know if we somehow help them, show them, teach them whatever. And that just gives me hope to think that everybody can be good, if we just find a way to change hearts and minds. Now, how we do that is very it's a different question. It's very difficult. And maybe there aren't always right answers for that. But it definitely, I want to believe in a world where people are inherently, or they can be inherently good. And in my world, everybody is capable of goodness. They may not always choose it, but they're always capable of it.
Excellent. So we have Kat asking, what is your advice for aspiring authors and writers? And she also wants you to know that she really loves you, Penn. Big fan.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. I have so much advice. I think the most important is imposter syndrome hits everyone. It hits everyone. And it often hits at the worst possible times. I was just talking with a friend, an author friend this morning, who has been just convinced her book is terrible and no one can tell her otherwise. And of course, she's like a best-selling author. She's got, hundreds of thousands of fans, but she is convinced that this book is absolutely terrible. And I told her, like, go put it down for a few weeks and come back to it. And so she did. And she reread it and she said, you know what? Actually, I kind of do like this book. I actually think it's not too bad. But in the moment when she was writing it and when she was editing it, she just thought it was garbage. And I have been there. I almost deleted my second book because I was so convinced it was just had no redeeming value, that people would hate it. I came so close to unpublishing the series. And now that's the book that most people say is their favorite book in the series. And it's a really beloved book in this series. So whoever your favorite authors are, they are having the exact same thoughts that are in your head of, I can't do this, I suck, my book is terrible, this writing is derivative and unoriginal. We're all thinking the same things. So you really have to just trust in yourself and your voice. You have to trust that your art deserves to be heard and that there are readers in the world who will love the story that you have to tell. Of course, you should always be trying to improve your craft and getting better and, all of that. But don't let those negative voices in your head stop you from putting your art into the world, because like that's what we need most, in my opinion, is more art and more artists who are challenging us to think and keeping that emotion, keeping us from being apathetic or nihilistic, like making people feel things. It's so important now more than ever. So keep doing it and don't let the negative voices win.
Penn, one way authors can improve their craft is by reading other authors.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, Penn, who are you reading right now, and who in the last 6 to 12 months, give us a book you would recommend?
So I'm not reading a lot right now because I'm working on my final book and I can't read a lot while I'm writing, or else I start finding my voice changing to whoever I'm reading. But when I have a little time right now, I'm trying to read outside of my genre. So I'm reading a lot of contemporary romance, reading a lot of rom-coms. A friend of mine, Bryn Weaver, I'm obsessed with her books. They're really great. Butcher and Blackbird. It's like a serial killer rom-com, dark romance. It's so funny. It's great. Really love Emily Henry. She's amazing. Um, I the and whenever anybody asks me for a recommendation within romantasy, I always recommend the book I mentioned earlier, which is Cushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. It was my first romantasy. It was one of the OGs of the genre that really established what we now know of as romantasy and the tropes and the conventions that are now, very much expected. It's so poetic. It's just beautiful prose, lots of politics. It's very spicy. There's lots of steamy romance. It lots of strong women in many different roles. There's so many amazing authors now. For sure, go read the modern authors, but I also think it's great to read where we came from and some of those early books like Cushiel Start.
So, Penn, you had touched on sort of imposter syndrome and self doubt. This is somewhat of a similar question, but I'm going to ask it. Callie says, I work with students pursuing graduate creative writing degrees and often hear their struggle of navigating rejection. Have you ever experienced rejection as an author? And if so, how did you find the courage to keep going and putting your work out there?
On a daily basis. Yeah, for sure. It's a Publishing is hard. I thought I was had pretty thick skin before I got into publishing, and I learned that I was not prepared. It is a tough road. You will get insulted daily, just daily. Your art that's very dear to your heart will be trashed and dragged through the mud. And a lot of people really struggle with it. There's a lot of mental health crises among authors, I think. What helps me personally, number one is having friends, having like in within the industry, having a close group of friends who kind of starts roughly around the same time as you, that you're dealing with the same struggles at kind of the same times, that you can commiserate with. Being seen, I think, helps so much when you're going through hard times, and seeing other people that see that struggle and say like I understand why, and I like feel for you. I feel what you're going through, I think is really important. I personally really try to let it fuel me. I'm very driven by spite, if I'm being super honest. When somebody tells me, I remember there's a publisher who we were talking with for a while, and I really wanted to work with this publisher. And we got pretty far in the process, and then they decided they didn't want to publish my book. And I just remember, like, I was, this is very poetic. It was like a scene out of a movie. I lived right off the Champs-Élysées, and it was like raining that day, and I was walking home from a meeting I was at, and I got the email that they rejected me. And I just sat on a bench on the Champs-Élysées in Paris while it rained on me, and I just sobbed. I just cried. So I was so disappointed. And I got it out of my system, and I said, you know what? I'm going to I'm going to show them. I'm going to get another deal, and I'm going to hit the New York Times bestseller list. I'm going to sell millions of copies, and I'm going to make them say, "Oh, we missed the boat. We should have invested in her when we had the chance." And I went home and I was fueled up, ready to go. Like, let's show them. And there's been so many times where that has happened, where somebody said no or turned me down. And I said, I'm going to make them regret that decision so hard. And and I have done that many times, gotten to the point where I said, I know they're looking at me right now and saying, oh, we wish we had gone with that. And it's the best feeling in the whole world. I mean, there's no better feeling than knowing you proved someone wrong. So maybe that's not the healthiest answer,
No,
but it's the realest one, is let that spite motivate you and fuel you to make every person who's ever said no to you regret that as hard as they can.
I love that, Penn. I'm gonna take that answer, and that's gonna stay with me for a while. I like that. I'm going to apply that to my life, I think. So we have an anonymous attendee who asks a couple of questions here. Who is your favorite character to write besides Henry?
Yeah. Taryn, he's the fan favorite. Everybody, I think, loves Taryn. You don't see much of him in book one, a tiny little cameo at the end. He's a big part of books two and three. He's the best friend of one of our love interests. He's very much a golden retriever. Um, Maybe not the brightest light bulb in the box, but the most fun for sure. He's the most fun to be around. He's great comedic relief. But what I love about him is he is very nuanced and has a lot of depth to him. He is very funny on the outside as a defense mechanism to a lot of depression and trauma that he's, dealing with on the inside. That's really his shield, is his humor. And I love him because he cracks me up every time I write him, but also because there is so much depth to him. And I really like exploring that and what makes him who he is, and what he He's very much a hopeless romantic. He believes in love and he wants it so bad. And so seeing him kind of pursue that goal has been a really fun thing to write.
Totally. The same attendee asks, what's one of your favorite quotes from your novels? Do you have a favorite quote you want to give
Yeah. Yeah, there is, I can't remember it verbatim. Um, but a big theme in the book is, do the ends justify the means,
right.
and to what extent? Because we have on one side we have some people who are oppressed, who are fighting for their liberation, and they're saying anything is justified to free our people, because thousands have died, thousands more will die if we do nothing. And so we're willing to do anything to stop this from happening. On the other side, you have this ruling class who sees this growing war, and they're saying if there is a war, thousands will die. So anything is justified to suppress that war and keep it from happening, even if that means we have to do some really violent, inhumane things. And both sides are really like committed to this idea of, well, if I don't do X, this worse Y will happen, so X is okay. And the Diem, our main character, and Luther, another main character, are having this conversation, and she mentions that innocent people are dying. And he asks her, well, what if that's the cost for us to be powerful enough to protect ourselves? And she says, if the cost of innocence is a cost that we're willing to pay, we don't deserve to be powerful. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. If that's something we're willing to sacrifice to get power, maybe we don't deserve that power in the first place. So I might not have done the exact wording justice, but
Sure.
that moment and that sentiment is something I think about very often.
Wonderful. So, folks, we're just going to slowly wind down here. I have a couple more questions. Jessica, it's a little bit of a long one, so stay with me here. Jessica says, I'm obsessed with this series. Thank you so much for putting your work out there for us to enjoy. And her question is there anything about mating bonds that you can tell us that we don't already know from books 1 through 3? Please tell me I'm not crazy for reading into the last few chapters of book 3 and thinking there were a lot of mating bond related Easter eggs.
um, I will say everything that has been said about mating bonds in the books is relevant. There is no detail that was provided for no reason. So interpret that how you will.
There we go. Shayna wants to know, are you going to be working on anything after the Kindred, easy for me to say, the Kindred's Curse saga? I know you're working on the last book now. Have you certainly seem like a planner. You plan your
Mhm.
books, you plan your marketing. I imagine you're planning the next steps in your career. What comes after book number 4? Are we doing spin-offs? Are we doing prequels? Are we doing a new series? Are we doing a standalone? What are we staying in romantasy, or are we doing a different genre? What
Yeah.
is next for Penn?
I'll definitely be staying in romantasy. This is the genre of my heart. It's where I love to write. It's where I feel the freest, I think, creatively. So I plan to stay here for a very, very long time. We will not be staying in this world. I want to give this series a nice, clean ending with no loose ends. So you will for sure know where everything ends up and have like a true resolution, as much as you can have, obviously. And I'm really excited about a new world, a new magic system, something totally different that's not at all related. I have written Diem, my main character, is kind of inherently very good. She's just a good person. She has a lot of compassion. She wants to do the right thing. I'm very excited about writing maybe something different and a main character who's maybe a little bad and a little bit unapologetically morally gray. So I think that will be a really fun change of pace. I have several ideas. I'm not letting myself think too much about them because that's going to be my reward for finishing this book and getting it out is getting to think about the next stage because for me that's like the most fun part. So I'm excited about it. But even though I'm trying not to think about it, my brain is on its own plotting and planning. And the other day I couldn't stop myself. I had to just open my notes app and type up basically an entire plot outline for a new trilogy because it was just in my head and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I got it out and now I've forgotten about it and I'm putting it aside. But the second Burn is done, I'm really excited about hopping back into there and creating something new.
There we go. So, Penn, I don't do a lot of these interviews. I'm usually a behind the scenes tech person. Was there anything I should have asked you that I didn't? Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to speak on now?
I don't think so. I'll be doing some events this year. I'm going to be at a Polycon in DC in a few weeks. I'm in the middle of a French tour at the moment. If anybody happens to be in France for the next couple of weeks, you can come see me. I'll be doing an event in London in July and an event in Dallas, Texas, which is my hometown, in September. And I've got a Kindred's Curse themed ball that's happening in Colorado. So if you like putting on a fancy dress and a mask, it's going to be really fun. I'm going to be there, and we have a whole lot of surprises and giveaways that are so exciting. So that is going to be in August in Colorado. And I see in the comments somebody asking about a book tour for Burn. Yes, once we announce Burn's release date, we're going to try and do a big North America, US and Canada tour for Burn. So hopefully a lot more cities as well. So lots of traveling, lots of opportunities to see me in person. If you're interested, you can subscribe to my mailing list on my website, penncole.com, or just follow me on social media. I'm at author Penn Cole on all of the platforms and be the first to know.
So, folks, let's give Penn a big virtual round of applause for a great conversation. You carried me, Penn, to a passable interview. I really appreciate it. You had such wonderful answers to my very
Thank
basic
you.
questions. So, thank you. And thank you to the 10 or so audience members that asked questions. That was wonderful as well. For those watching live, look for an email from me later tonight with the recording. Also, please make sure to fill out the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom. So I encourage everyone, whether it's Wellesley Books or really any other independent bookstore, if you have to, Amazon, wherever you want to shop, please go out and purchase a copy, really of all three books in the series, but especially our third book, Heat of the Everflame, which was just re-released on Tuesday. And Penn, we really look forward to book number 4. By the time book 4 comes out, I will have read books 1 through 3. I promise. I'm
Good.
getting
All
there.
right, I'll quiz
They're
you.
big books, okay? All right, but folks, Penn, thank you so much. Wonderful job. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.